Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Everybody knows what I'm about to say. Download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. Please do that. And also, if you like what Joe and I do, we're all over social media. So we're on Rumble, X, YouTube, YouTube and Facebook, of course, till they take us down, which is probably sometime soon. However, we are still there. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, we do go live, purely, political, cultural commentary, Thursday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern time. So today we're very pleased and honored to be welcoming to the program Francis X Maier. And he has written a new book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. Now, that's available at Ignatius Press. We always emphasize to please support our Catholic publishers, all right, as well as our authors. So please buy it from the publisher. But Father Fessio will get mad at me if I didn't mention, also tell your local bookstore at your parish to go and order a few copies and stock it on the shelf. We promise you, people are going to buy it. So now many of you out there, obviously we're a Catholic audience, know who Francis is. Having said that, Francis X Maier is a senior fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. He served for 23 years as senior aide and special assistant to Archbishop Charles Chaput in Denver and Philadelphia. He previously served for 15 years as editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register, Newsweekly, and earlier still as a screenwriter and story analyst based in Los Angeles. Francis X Maier, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, our brother.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited about the conversation. This is a great conversation. I'm going to throw it over to Joe Fran, and we're going to get started.
We always begin with a prayer to Our Lady, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Just a couple comments that Joe Pasillo made. Like, Father Fessio's been on the show a number of times. We love him. He's like our Italian uncle. He is. I kid you not. Like, he's
constantly putting us in our place.
Like, he'll just be like,
has to,
yeah, he'll be like, Joe. Like, we love him. Absolutely love him.
You know, Father Joe is, I've known Father Joe for like 43 years now, and he's the godfather of our daughter. So he's quite a character. And actually, he's one of the long form interviews in the book, and it's really a hoot reading it because he's extremely candid and a lot of fun to talk with.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, he's a blast. Joe has a habit of saying, to be honest with you, Father Fessio said, does that mean you haven't been honest up to this point, Joe?
He's a character. He's a character.
But like Joe said, we love him, and he is a great conversationalist. So we have a lot of fun. As I'm sure, Fran, we're going to have a lot of fun in this conversation. Joe Resinello, where do you want to get started?
Well, just Archbishop Chaput. Right before the show, Joe and I were talking. I've read a number of his books. If I was to pick a prototype, and I'm not just saying this, I think he is it. And why I say that is this: as far as bishops go, he has no agenda but the church's agenda. He's clear. He's fair. He doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. He has love in his heart, but at the same time, he speaks truth to power, and he's not afraid. If you ask me, that's exactly what a bishop should be. Philadelphia is a huge diocese. I'll also be honest. I think he got robbed. He should have been a cardinal. My opinion. I'm allowed to voice it. It's my $2 opinion. It's worth just $2, but that's my opinion. I think he was great. Your comments on that? Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, well, I worked for him for 23 years very intimately. And if you liked candor, it was a good place to work because if you asked a question, you were going to get the right answer. I mean, an honest, straightforward answer. And I liked that a lot. And I think that's one of the, if you can take candor, if you can take honesty, rigorous honesty in a relationship, he was a perfect guy to work for. And it's one of the reasons why he attracted, I think, very good people. The CFOs he had were outstanding guys and served the church extraordinarily well. But they were people who didn't have a lot of time for evasion or passive aggression. I mean, they wanted to work for a guy who was a real leader, and Shappy was absolutely that from the get-go. So, the fact that I survived for 23 years, I guess, says something positive about my own ability to do stuff, because he was a fair guy, but he expected a lot from the people who worked for him, and he did that. He did that primarily because he had a great sense of responsibility to the people he was serving. In other words, he wanted the best people to serve him so that he could serve his people most effectively, and he did that very well, I think, over the years.
Francis X Maier is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy his book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. It's available at Ignatius Press. Fran, let me ask you this. Do you feel, I guess, in a round indirect way, staying on Archbishop Chaput, but generally speaking, it seems that Rome has been a bit critical of the church in America. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's kind of like, critical in what way? It's like, I'm not going to lie to you. Joe and I say on the show all the time, and I promise you this, Fran. Joe and I do not bash bishops. We don't. That's not our game here.
Right.
Okay. But we have we do have to express some concerns once in a while, particularly because, in the American church, I quite frankly, and I think Joe agrees with me, sometimes we don't know what the heck is going on. And yet Rome sometimes we believe is critical of the church in America. But then we say, well, in what way? And unfortunately, I think Archbishop Chaput got caught up in the middle of that, because as Joe said, we both think he should have been a cardinal.
Mm-hmm.
Like and so I think you know where I'm going with this. Has Rome been critical of the American church, or what is Rome's view of the American church in general, in your view?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you know church history, popes have tastes just like everybody else. I mean, popes in the past have either been pro-Spanish or pro-French. I mean, the history of the church is filled with that. I think you can understand Pope Francis simply by understanding the relationship of Latin America and the United States over a very long period of time. I mean, the U.S. involvement in Latin America has been a mixed bag. Sometimes we've done a great deal of good, and other times Latin Americans have seen us as being interfering and troublesome, and that spills over. I mean, I think some of those feelings are certainly shared by Francis, and I think American bishops find that frustrating and confusing, because from their perspective, they're trying very hard to be very faithful to Rome, and instead they have a sense that they're not fully appreciated. I mean, that, I did 30 interviews with bishops, among the interviews, the 103 that I did for the book, and there's no question that the American bishops are very faithful to the Pope. They always have been, and that goes back in history to the fact that when we were a mission church in the early centuries of this country, Rome was one of our protectors in a dominantly Protestant country. So there's no question that American bishops are faithful to the Holy Father. They do feel a lot of confusion and sometimes frustration, in the sense that they're not appreciated. They sense that they're not appreciated by Rome and disliked, and that doesn't sit very well with some of the men that I interviewed. They don't know how to fix that. They don't know why that feeling is so strong. They understand the criticism of the United States, but the American church is probably more vigorous than any church in the world in terms of lay activity. We don't get a sense of that because we're focused on the problems. But when you step back and you look at the church globally, the U.S. church is extremely alive, particularly in comparison to Europe. So there's some frustration there, and I think it's warranted, because I think under the current pontificate, Rome is not particularly sympathetic with the American situation.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I don't want to sound naive, but I would think that it's just, this is the Catholic Church. It's not supposed to be that way. I'm an American Catholic. Am I an American Catholic, or am I just a Catholic? And I understand what you're saying, Fran, that everybody will have their biases, okay? But in the church, it's not supposed to be that way. In the church, it's supposed to be, well, you're supposed to care for my soul, because my soul matters just as much as a person who's in Africa or in Latin America or in Asia or whatever the case might be. And it's sometimes, I'm not going to lie to you, here's a naughty, naughty word. Sometimes it seems very political. and I don't want the church to be political.
Yeah, well,
And and again, I hate to sound naive, but what's
you're
your
not
comments
naive.
on
I
it?
mean,
Because it
I think
strikes
that
me as political, like some of this stuff, like we were talking about Shapiro, he should have been a cardinal, and it strikes me that Joe also that it's kind of that was a political decision and not a pastoral one.
yeah, well, I think a lot of priests in Philadelphia would feel that way. You know, the Archbishop had a very realistic attitude toward that. He was ordained as a Capuchin Franciscan, and so he never intended to be a bishop, and he certainly never sought after being an archbishop or a cardinal. So it didn't really offend him. I think a lot of Philadelphia Catholics were surprised and upset by the fact that he wasn't made a cardinal, because Philadelphia is one of the premier sees of the United States. So it was just really rather weird. And I do think it was political. I mean, I think there are divisions within the church that see the archbishop as conservative, and they didn't want that, and they effectively blocked it. But look, that's water under the bridge. I mean, it didn't affect his ministry. He certainly didn't allow it to interfere with his sleep. He slept very well. So it's just that's what it is. It's a reminder that popes are human beings. I mean, they're not saints. They never have been, and there have been some really, I mean, thoroughly bad popes over the centuries. Most have been good men, but not all of them, and all of them have had their human flaws, including the current one. So that's just part of the terrain.
The book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church, the author, Francis X. Maier, and the book is available at Ignatius Press. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Well, let's just lay the groundwork for the listeners, what the book's all about. As you said, 103 interviews. You interviewed bishops, you interviewed priests, you interviewed both lay, women,
Right.
and men, all varying backgrounds. Over a 17-month period, that period is December 2020 through May of 2022. So how'd you put the list together, and why that time period?
Well, that time period coincides with my retirement. I retired along with the Archbishop, and when you retire, unless you want to shrivel up and become dust, you have to come up with something to do. And one of the things that I could do, because I had been doing it for 46 years of my life, was give a portrait of the church as my experience of her. And so, the 103 people, I could have easily done 300 people, except I'd have gone insane and be 90 years old by the time I finished the book. The 30 bishops that the 30 bishops I interviewed were bishops I knew or who knew me, and so I could approach them for the interview. The ones that interested me were a mix of urban and rural dioceses in 25 states. I wanted a portrait of the church across the country and the different kind of pastoral experiences that bishops had. So that accounts for the bishops. In terms of I needed a portrait of priests who were doing good work, lay people who were just average people in the pews, and also educators. I had a particular focus on educators because they're the ones that form the next generation. So most of the lay people I interviewed were people who were, married with children. They needed those experiences, but in some form of ministry or apostolates. And I had a particular interest, as I said, in educators because they form young people at critical points in their development, and that has an enormous influence on the next generation. I also focused on, this was a personal interest of mine because my wife and I have a child with Down syndrome, and 3 of our 11 grandkids have various special needs. So I interviewed parents of special needs, and that was, for me personally, that was the most moving chapter because these people were heroic. I mean, just absolutely heroic Christians in terms of the form of love that they took in dealing with very difficult situations. So I sought out, guys, I sought out an opportunity to portray at a specific moment in time a 360-degree portrait of the church in the United States. And I think, you can always do more, but I think it captures the church's health in a pretty accurate way at a very important moment, because the world is changing very rapidly and the church has an important role to play in humanizing those changes.
Yeah, the some in the church need to like lace up their Reeboks. That's how fast the world seems to be changing. It's like every 5 minutes you're expected, and we won't get too political on the show, but you're expected to have to adapt to all these insanities that are out there. And sometimes I think the church has to kind of keep up. Fran Mayer is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy the book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. So out of the 30 bishops or so that you interviewed, Fran, was there a common theme that you drew out of that from those bishops? As you said, they're from all different, they're urban, they're rural, but was there any commonality there?
Yeah, I think one of the commonality, well, first of all, faithfulness. These are good guys who are not bitter at all. There was a lot of anxiety about government, not so much state or local government, but there's a lot of anxiety about the direction of the federal government interfering with religious freedom in the coming years. That was a common theme throughout. I think a lot of confidence in young people, a lot of awareness, realism in terms of the bleeding out of certain numbers of Catholics. That's a concern. And another common theme is that they get very few vocations from the current pontificate. Most of the vocations in the seminaries of the 30 guys that I talked to were inspired by John Paul II or Benedict. A few from Francis, but not many.
Yeah. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Just a couple comments. My observation, I'm a father of 5. And as a father, obviously, and we're all fathers here, we have concerns for our children. My observation, and I'm not going to get specific, I think our bishops could be a little bit more direct, particularly with Catholic education. Our children are getting slaughtered in America, slaughtered. I have an MBA, so does my wife. I can afford to send my kids to Catholic school. The average American kid does not have parents who have MBAs, and they have to go to public school, and they're getting slaughtered. And as a father, I would not permit it. I live in a box before I send my kids to that. I think the bishops have to get, as fathers, have to be a little bit more out there, and they're not. You talked about like the political situation. Again, the church is apolitical. I try to be apolitical. Both parties have issues, but as a father, you have concerns. I think that voice has to be more bold and clear. And it seems to me when certain people do that, they're put down. That's a problem, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean you're disrespectful. That just means you're concerned. That means you're a father. Talk to that, because as a father and as a Catholic, I say to myself, what is going on? And that's why I loved Bishop Chaput, because he did do that. I found him to be respectful. He was balanced. He didn't have a chip on his shoulder.
Right.
But in his books, I read with 2 of them, what's it called? Stranger in a Strange Land and Give Unto Caesar What Is Caesar's, Give Unto. I thought they were so spot on and insightful. I think they all need to be doing that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, a number of thoughts. Number one, my EPPC, my Ethics and Public Policy Center colleague, Mary Hassan, wrote a book, I think with the title, Get Your Kids Out of Public Schools. Public schools are just, there's some good public schools out there, but most of them are really, really educating people in a lot of very bad kind of social science theories on gender and other things. But let's put that aside for a minute. Catholic schools are supposed to be doing the opposite of that. You raised the question of the bishops being more direct. I've got a couple of answers to that. Number one, bishops do have to be careful because whatever they say gets jumped on by both the right and the left. So it's very difficult for them to be candid. And that's one of the reasons that I made the bishops' interviews. I specifically made those anonymous so they could speak candidly, okay? That's not an excuse for not being direct, but it is just a reality check in terms of the kind of environment that they're working in. It's very toxic in a lot of ways in terms of public relations. Now let's go to the direct thing. Remember that the generation of bishops that we've got right now was formed at a time when they were 2 things. They were corporate managers. A lot of these guys are running basically small corporations, and that absorbs an awfully lot of the time, an inordinate amount of the time. But the other thing too is that we've been trained as Catholics, certainly my generation, I'm a boomer, and a lot of the bishops are boomers, we were part of the furniture. I mean, we're good Americans. We're supposed to fit in. We're not supposed to make undue noise. We're supposed to be cooperative with government and cooperative with the culture and try to be leaven within the culture without making a lot of noise. I think what distinguished Chappie was that he saw through that and realized that the direction of the culture was very negative, and it was going to get more negative if he didn't speak up. Now, I'm hoping that as pressures increase on the church, you're going to get more guys who are just simply realistic and start being much more direct about their statements. But the problem you're describing is a mix, Joe, of both personality, the kind of person who is appointed bishop has to change, and also just the cultural terrain. America's been pretty good to Americans up until now. It's only in the last 25 or 30 years that things have really started going south. And people are still in the framework of thinking that, we can make things better, we can fit in. Well, that's not going to be possible in 20 years. The next 25 years for the church in this country are going to be very difficult, and it's going to require a different quality of leadership. Chappie was sort of a presage of that, but it's just going to be a very different environment requiring very different leaders.
Fran, let me ask you this. You said you're a boomer. Just the thought came into my head. I'm sure you're familiar with the book Catholic Power and American Freedom, or America by Paul Blanchard, came out like right after World War II.
Yeah.
So I guess where I'm going with this, and for those of you out there, you'll understand where I'm going with this. It seems that the Catholic Church was bullied in a way, because Joe and I are pretty good with history. We're not historians, but we're pretty good with history.
Sure.
The early to middle part of the 20th century seemed to show a presence, a Catholic presence in America that I don't think you saw before then or after then.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And in that time, particularly, let's say, in between the wars, during the Depression, then during World War II, and then after World War II, Catholics had a lot of power, particularly in urban areas. We mentioned Philadelphia. You mentioned, you could talk about Detroit. You could talk about Chicago. Joe and I are from Newark, New Jersey. Strong. There was a predominantly Italian Catholic in Newark, New Jersey. And Joe and I feel on the show, we've spoken about it before, that torpedoing of Catholic power, it was deliberate. And Paul Blanchard puts it out in his book, where it's almost like Catholics are afraid to hold firm to Catholic teaching, let's say on areas like contraception, gay marriage, abortion, and things like that. So especially because later you get the sexual revolution in the 1960s, and they buy into it. Mm-hmm. So now, and then I don't want to sound judgmental, and I'm going to throw it over to you because I know I'm a little long-winded, but then it's like you become Catholic in name only, because you're not really speaking up for Catholic truth, because America and Americanism becomes almost your religion. And again, I'm going to throw it over to you and tell me where you might think that I'm off, or any
the Blanchard thing, Joe. The Blanchard thing is really I'm glad you brought that up, because the reaction to that Blanchard argument was, the Jesuit John Courtney Murray wrote "We Hold These Truths," which was kind of a Catholic response to Blanchard, and Murray believed very strongly that. First of all, he was very realistic that the United States is a product of Enlightenment and Protestant thought. Okay, Catholics didn't fit here, but he argued that Catholics could fit here and bring kind of a Catholic leavening to the culture that would replace Protestant thought as the Protestant denominations declined in numbers and influence. So there's a huge influence. There's a huge impulse among Catholics in the early and middle of the 20th century to assimilate and Catholicize American culture. Well, we did a really great job of assimilating, but in the process of assimilating, we were digested by American culture. So if you look at the number of Catholics in political office, we've done extraordinarily well. But what kind of an effect has that had in terms of Catholic influence on the nature of American politics? Well, it's significantly less. And that's because we're more American now than we are Catholic. We're Protestants who go to Mass. And I'm not the only one who's observed that, you know. I mean, we've lost the particularly we've lost the Catholic zeal to evangelize the culture in the process of becoming, you know, attorneys and political figures and doctors. We've done that very well. We've really economically achieved a great deal. But in terms of evangelizing the culture, we've done a pretty lousy job.
No, and I guess that's the idea is that we let the culture evangelize us
Exactly right. Yeah.
in the opposite direction. And then when you have a voice, as we were speaking earlier about Archbishop Chaput, when you have a voice of clarity amongst the bishops in America, and then it seems like, well, they're put down, they're attacked, they're pilloried, and the press, of course. Okay, we know what the press is all about. As soon as you stand up for Catholic teaching, look at what's going on now with abortion. Maybe we'll end this segment. I love your thoughts on this. Joe and I said on the show a million times, be careful what you ask for if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, because God has spared us in our view, because that was Roe versus Wade was imposed on us. Look at what's going on in America now. Now
Yeah.
we're choosing abortion.
Hmm.
Now you can't blame the Supreme Court.
No,
or the
but what
left.
you can do, Joe, I mean, you're right. This is a really disturbing trend in American politics, but it is a true trend. That's where we are. And, you know, honesty, the truth it may be difficult to swallow, but it's never bad. I mean, it's really clarifying exactly what kind of a country we're becoming. And that'll do two things. That'll scare a lot of Catholics who are tepid or indifferent, but the ones who are serious are going to be more serious and more committed. And I really do believe that, you know. I mean, I've used the example before of the pressure of intense weight on coal is the production of diamonds, and the more pressure, the purer the diamond. And I think part of that is what's going on in the culture. Certain number of people are going to crack and fall away. Other people are going to become much more committed. And you see that in a lot of the lay movements that are emerging in the United States. And you see it particularly in young people, like in organizations like Fellowship of Catholic University students and others that are really motivated. I mean, amazingly zealous. There are not enough of them, but the ones that are there are real gems. And so I think that those are things that are the seeds for renewal down the. I won't be around to see it, but you know, but that's a sign of hope in a really difficult time.
I would agree.
Absolutely. Joe, let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick break here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Francis X Maier is joining us. We're discussing his new book and other things, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. Now, that's available at Ignatius Press, so we would ask you to please buy it from the publisher. Please talk to your local Catholic bookstore, ask them to order a few copies, put it on the shelf. Obviously, we'd love to see you do that. And Fran, where else can our audience members buy the book?
Well, you can get it on Amazon, of course, or you can get it from Barnes and Noble, preferably from Ignatius. If you do it on Amazon and you like the book, well, you know, I mean, please give it a rating if you wouldn't mind. But it's available online.
Awesome. All right. So listen, everybody, stick around. This is a great conversation, and we got another segment for you. We're going to come back in a minute. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello, and we are way in the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, and we're being joined by Francis X Maier. We are discussing his new book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. It's available at Ignatius Press. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to start?
We talked about the bishops. Let's talk about what you kind of heard from the priests. Of just full disclosure, I'm 53. I went to a Christian Brothers high school. I went to a Jesuit college. I went to a Jesuit graduate school. I've seen the gamut, and I've seen a little bit of change. I mean, when I was in high school, you had a little bit more of that like 70s priest, you know, the felt banner craziness going on in the parish. My father used to have a stroke, but he endured it. And I went along, you know, went to church my whole life. And now you're seeing a different type of priest. I think it's a result of John Paul. They're a little bit more, I hate to use the word orthodox, conservative, liberal. It's just Catholic. It's in the catechism. You either believe it or you don't, but they're a little bit clearer. They're a little bit more courageous. And recently I was in St. Patrick's on the line for confession. Young priest, he's got a cassock on. You didn't see
Yeah.
that when I was in high school. Did not see that. In fact, I didn't even know priests wore cassocks in high school. Didn't know that. And now you see it. Talk about what you saw there, what I kind of like that arc, because I do think that is a positive arc. And I think there is hope in that for America.
Yeah, well, I'm part of the arc. I mean, I'm a boomer. I graduated from Notre Dame in '70, and by the time I was raised Catholic, went to Notre Dame and immediately pulled the ripcord. Met my wife, who, I mean, she was delightful and extremely attractive and very warm. And also, it was going to be her way or the highway, and her way was coming back to the church, which got me back to practice. I think my generation of guys that were formed in the seminary had to deal with an enormous amount of chaos theologically, and also don't underestimate the impact of the sexual revolution. I mean, that just really shook everything, every institution of the church. So the people that were formed in that period tended to be, for the want of a better word, a little more flexible in terms of belief, more liberal in terms of their ecclesiology and stuff like that. Of course, those guys are aging out now. And one of the great things of the last 30 years is the reform of the seminaries in this country, which is really one of the most significant things that's happened to the church in the United States in the last, half century. We have much stronger seminaries than we did 30 years ago, and they're producing very faithful guys. I like your distinction, Joe, of kind of eliminating these terms of liberal and conservative when we can. These are guys that are coming out of the seminary pretty realistic about the culture that they're entering and very faithful to the church and her teachings. And so they're high quality guys. Now, the difference, one of the things that I found in writing the book was the difference in perceptions between bishops and priests. Bishops tend to see their priests as brothers. The priests, because of the sex abuse scandal, are much more tentative about their attitudes toward their bishops. I mean, they have a lot less instinctive trust because a lot of these guys are uneasy that they're just going to be thrown under the bus with a single false accusation. So there's that tension between the way bishops see their priests and the way priests see their bishops. Nonetheless, I think the church, on the balance, is got a really good crew of both bishops and priests serving, and that's what I found in my interviews. I mean, these guys really committed to the church, whatever their personal feelings are about their priests or their bishops. They love the church and they're trying to do their best. And it's a really tough job. I mean, I'm glad I'm a layperson, and I'm glad I don't have that work because it's pretty demanding if you do it properly.
They have to have God's grace, because to get through what, like you mentioned, the sex abuse scandal, there's financial scandals, things that you could look at. Unfortunately, people look at it and say, why should I be in the Catholic Church? Look at all the problems. Okay, go read a history book. The church has always had problems. There's always been a certain level of corruption in the church. That we won't get into that too much. But yeah, the strength that these men have to have. And because, I mean, I look at it as a hopeful thing. The reason why the church is always under attack by the evil one, because that's the church that Jesus founded.
Well, I agree, Joe. I mean, I think, look at, if you, I saw this up close and personal. I mean, if you do the job of a bishop properly, it's 24/7, 365. I mean, these guys really work hard, and they're really, all of the men that I interviewed are really dedicated. They're very different personalities, different skill sets, but they're all good men trying to do their best for their people. And I think that gets underestimated or underreported by a lot of people. In terms of the priests that I interviewed, again, these are people who, I'll give you an example. I mean, we've got a mid-career priest in my parish, and when we arrived in Philadelphia, when we moved with the Archbishop from Denver to Philadelphia, the parish that we moved into was potentially a wealthy parish. It was on its last legs. It was just dying, and it was dying because the pastor, who was a decent guy, didn't have any human skills. So about 3 years after we got here, we got a new pastor, younger guy, who just systematically turned the entire place around, and not dramatically, but just by showing through a lot of little steps that he really loved his people. You know, I mean, during COVID, we got a call from him. Everybody in the parish got a call from him to see how we were doing. You know, he did everything he could during COVID to make the church accessible, to keep confessions going, to keep Eucharistic adoration going in the parking lot, for heaven's sakes. You know, little things that really showed that he cared. And that, you know, during that entire period, our donations went up significantly because people said, "Hey, this place is alive again," and they were committed. And I think if you get a pastor like that, and there are many of these guys out there who really are trying to do the right thing and love their people and communicate that love, well, then they're going to succeed. So frequently, I guess where I'm going with this is that if you read the paper or listen to the news, the church is constantly in trouble and everything is going to hell in a handbasket, and it's not. I mean, the fact is that we do have problems. The people I interviewed are very candid about those problems. But the very fact that they're in the church and committed to the church is a sign of her health, not her sickness. And we need to focus on that because there's an awfully lot of life in the church. In fact, at the end of this whole process, I mean, I spent 3 years of my life developing this book. And there really were moments when I thought, what in the name of God am I doing here, you know? But at the end of it all, I came away exhilarated by the whole experience. And I don't think you can read True Confessions and come away with a sense of loss. I mean, it's a profoundly hopeful book because you're encountering one person after another who is fully committed to the church and admirable in the life that they're leading.
I would so agree with you because one of the things that in recent, you know, like over the last year or 2 years, we're seeing high profile conversions to the Catholic Church from people you would not expect. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're coming into the church not in some wishy-washy way. And I firmly believe, I mean, because of the way people are, you know, sometimes you need someone else to charge the hill, and you're willing to you know, to charge with them. All right. So whether it's a Shia LaBeouf, or Kevin James, who is Catholic, but I think he's even more Catholic. Rob Schneider, Russell Brand was praying the Rosary on his Rumble channel.
I couldn't believe it when I saw that. I mean, it's just.
I was like, but see, now to me, that's very hopeful because that will, let's be realists, that will have an effect. That will, some people, out of the 6 million people that follow Russell Brand, they go look and say, he's going to the Catholic Church with all the problems the Catholic Church has. Yeah, because that's still where the truth is. Remember, that's where Jesus is, on the altar. So I think it's a great thing. And I think, and because they're not afraid of, let's say, because of the perception that maybe a lot of people have out there for whatever reason, you know, the way the press deals with the church and all that stuff. They're saying, I see the truth there. That's where I'm going. So Francis X Maier is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy his book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. It's available at Ignatius Press. Fran, let me ask you this. Or Joe, did you want to go through?
Yeah, I actually want to talk about.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, bud.
COVID. I think, again, I went to mass during COVID. An 80-year-old priest had mass in a parking lot. 80. I think we dropped the ball. I understand, and I want to be fair. I try to be fair. I understand that there's liability. This is not the church of the Middle Ages. Like, there's liability. If I'm a bishop, I work, you know, in the corporate setting. I understand that. But I do think, to your point, what you just said, we could have been more creative. It lacked courage, and it showed. I think we dropped the ball.
I think that's one of the Joe, that's one of the comments I heard consistently. There was a lot of anger about the way the COVID situation was handled, that we cooperated much too quickly with regulations that were really kind of nuts. And particularly looking back on things, were completely excessive.
Absolutely. I mean, we could be, and I'll just relay my experience. My father was a first generation Italian. He was a barber. And he has said there's two standards. The rules apply to me. And as a layman, you know, I'm open to life. I have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to feed my family. And I'm out there on the radio talking like a crazy person, Well,
that's because you are, but go ahead.
And that's a given. So my point is, I don't see the same skin in the game. I got skin in the game and I didn't see it. And that's point one. Number two, I look at the American landscape right now. I recently heard a Protestant pastor in Idaho. I'm not going to mention his name. But he said something that I think he spot on. America needs to repent.
Hmm.
We are so off. We kill children in the third trimester. We mutilate young girls, lopping off their breasts. I can go on.
Hmm.
What is going on? We
Well, I
should
think,
be, please. I mean, I am nobody in the pew, but like this voice, I think we need John the Baptist back.
yeah, well, look, two things. Number one, I completely agree with you about the frustration that you felt with the closure of parishes and churches during COVID. In terms of what's going on, I mean, I've said this 100 times, and when I first started saying it, I think people thought I was nuts. I think we're living through through an effective new Reformation. Now that sounds crazy because that the differences between 500 years ago and now are so obvious and so many. But I really literally mean a reformation of society, a restructuring of the way that we think about society and even what it means to be human. And we're going in a direction now, pardon me, that I think is really troubling. You named it. I mean, we're becoming literally a homicidal state. That's the defining issue of the coming election. It's all about abortion. Abortion 24/7 in terms of the mainstream media, that is the central issue that's driving things. And think about that. I mean, it's an insane kind of way of looking at the world, that would be the most important issue facing Americans in 2024. It's completely nuts, but that's the image that's being thrown at us. And you named it. I mean, the kind of grotesque violence, intimate violence that's being done to young men and young women through gender ideology is just an obscenity. So we think about America. Look, we're old enough to think about America as it was 25 and 50 years ago. It's a completely different country now. And I've used this example many times too. You know, when our oldest son was accepted to West Point, we were enormously proud because we were trained, and rightly so, to be patriotic Americans as Catholics. I wouldn't discourage anyone from going into the military academies, but I wouldn't encourage my children to do it anymore. I mean, I have real reservations about my kids dying for sexual practices that I have profound problems with, and behaviors in terms of things like abortion that I consider to be grotesque and vile. I don't want my kids dying for that. And it really creates, I think, for believing Catholics, a very problematic situation. I mean, how can you love your country when your country is doing things like the kind of LGBTQ and transgender and abortion issues that are so dominant in our political vocabulary right now? It's a tough time to be Catholic and faithful and patriotic at the same time.
Yeah, and you mentioned about things that we have always taken for granted, like the rights that I have come from God. They don't come from you. I don't get it from you, Mr. Politician. I don't get it from the government. I don't get it from the press. And two major examples recently that Joe and I have mentioned on the show is the reporter from one of the business networks, Bloomberg or Fox Business, saying that, these Christian nationalists, they really believe their rights come from God. Yeah. Yeah, like, I don't know if anybody broke it to you. That's kind of in our founding documents. I'm just a dummy from Newark, New Jersey, and even I know that. And quite frankly, a guy who I consider to be a quasi-false prophet, that Yuval Harari, he's out there at like a TED Talks thing, basically saying there are no such thing as rights.
Right.
He said, if you cut somebody open, where are the rights? This is what we have to be careful about, Fran. Because these fundamental assumptions that we know to be true, like I have certain rights, all right, natural rights, they're now trying to say, no, that's just a delusion. You don't have any rights. And the Catholic Church more than anybody, and I know the church will because God's going to raise up saints, has to say, absolutely not. We're not letting you go there. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think our elites don't believe in our own founding structure anymore. I mean, we all assume that we are living through a country that we're living in a country that hasn't existed for the last 20 years. I mean, you know, we look, our civics classes taught us that our founding documents created a republic, not a pure democracy, but a republic of limited powers and balancing institutions. And of course, the Declaration of Independence had a strong rooting in the idea of natural rights. But you just said it yourself; those natural rights don't mean anything if there isn't such a thing as human nature. And that's what a lot of scientific sources are saying now, that there is no such thing as a human nature, that it's completely plastic. And if that's the case, then all of those grounding, all those foundational thoughts that created the American Republic just evaporate into thin air. And that's very much where our leadership class is going now. And if you raise your voice against that, you're regarded as a Christian nationalist or a populist or whatever the language is that they want to use to demonize people that they disagree with. I mean, we're in a very, I don't want to frighten people because we shouldn't be frightened. We should have confidence in the Word of God and God's presence in our lives, but we should be realistic. And I think we're in a very difficult position as believers in this country, and it's not going to get better if everybody just rolls over and goes with the flow, because this is a time when we have to stand up and witness at some personal cost, and that's hard for people to accept because it's been easy for us as Christians in this country for a very long time.
You used the word. I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but just a quick comment. When you mentioned the word frightened, fear. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it reminds me, and I'm sure you know the line in the beginning of The Wasteland, where Elliot writes, "I will show you fear in a handful of dust."
Mm-hmm.
And I always think about that when I think of, and Elliot wrote about about crumbling cities and, the decay of Western civilization. And that line always stuck out to me, because when you have in your hand nothing but dust, after all the institutions have been destroyed, after everything's been stripped away, after you have no more rights, that's what you need to fear.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get try to tell people that we're not playing checkers here, man. No, we're talking about the very survival of Western civilization, or what it's going to look like. Or perhaps, is it going to transform into something even more insane, Fran, or more evil? Or perhaps maybe it goes in more of a Catholic direction, which is what we would hope. Or I guess it would be almost like a return to what was Western civilization, which, let's face it, was Catholic. Okay, not Protestant. It was Catholic. Your thoughts quickly.
Well, human beings are immortal, nations aren't. I mean, you and me, for better or for worse, are going to live forever. I mean, and either in the right place or the wrong place, depending on on the lives that we live. But nations die. They do, and our cultures die. I mean, they always have, and they always will. And we may be. Look. It's dangerous to be too negative because it gets people depressed, and that's not what I'm driving at here. I mean, it's an opportunity. It's not a negative. It's an opportunity for us to be who we say that we are, and that's a good thing. We say that we're Catholics. We say that we're confessing Christians, okay? Okay, what does that actually mean? Well, we haven't had to work very hard at that in this country because we've assumed that we're just kind of, part of the furniture. We belong here. It's the kind of friendly environment where everybody is more or less on the same page. Well, that's evaporated. It's evaporating, and it's evaporated. And now it's an opportunity to do a gut check and say, what do we really believe? All this stuff about God and church and, character and all, is that real, or is it just a lot of baloney? And quite a few of us have gotten tepid, and I'm sad about that. But for the people who are serious about their faith, the people who root themselves in mass and in adoration and in confession, the things that are the disciplines that keep us Catholic, those people are going to be tough. I mean, the power of the powerless is the ability and the courage to say no to a lie. And that's if that's the only power we have, that's sand in the machine. And that's a good thing.
There's one of the reasons I'm going to throw it over to Joe. That's one of the reasons why Joe and I started to do this show was in our own way and by the grace of God, we are trying to encourage other people because we're not the bravest guy. We're not the bravest soldiers in the army, if you know what I mean. But we're out there. Can't take that away from us, and we're trying to fight the fight. Francis X Maier is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Ignatius Press is the publisher. The book is True Confessions: Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. Please go out and buy it and support the publisher. Ignatius, get to your local Catholic bookstore. Ask him to order a few copies. Throw it on the shelf. We promise you, those books are not going to stay on the shelf too long. Joe Resinello, we have a few minutes left. What do you got for Fran?
I want to talk about the sexual abuse crisis. Joe and I grew up in the Newark Diocese. Obviously, that's something that was very close to us. McCarrick was here for many years. We've had Bill Donahue on this show a number of times. I read his book on the sexual abuse crisis. I thought it was so spot on. I highly recommend it for anyone out there. I thought it was fair and it was very comprehensive. Why do I bring this up? And this is Bill Donahue's conclusion. And I want to throw it to you, and I'm interested in your thoughts. He basically said it was not about pedophilia. Most of the abuse took place. They were boys that were basically after puberty. So it's basically post-puberty young men, which means that the priests were gay.
Yes.
Gay men are interested, or not all, but they committed a crime on a boy who already had experienced puberty. This is not articulated. And if you ask me, it's easily fixed. All of the popes, from John the 23rd straight to Francis, and in fact, Francis's language on this has been extraordinarily clear, that if you have strong homosexual tendencies, you have no business in the priesthood. And that is Bill Donahue's conclusion. And frankly, again, I come from a corporate background. It's an easy fix. No one's executing on the fix. Execute the fix.
Well, I think they are. No, I think that's one of the lessons that's been learned. I know it was in Philadelphia and in Denver. I mean, there's real efforts to select out people who are not appropriate for service in the priesthood now. But yeah, I mean, the point that you make, and it's, you know, as a parent, it's just hilarious to watch the kind of gesticulations people go through to try to separate the homosexuality issue from the abuse issue. And it's very clear, I mean, overwhelmingly obvious that the abusers in the sexual abuse disaster were primarily homosexual men. And to try to get around that is just dishonest, frankly. And so the way to fix the problem is, or to certainly dramatically improve the problem, is to the degree that it's possible, remove those kind of persons who have those temptations from the priesthood, because it just doesn't make sense to ordain them. And I think a lot's been done in that direction. I really do.
No, I would agree, because I send my kids to Catholic school. It's probably the safest place because of everything that has taken place because of that. But also, we have interviewed a victim of McCarrick. He was on our show. And again, speaking as a dad, you know, if that was my son and he was clearly wounded, saying sorry, I mean, yes.
Oh, it's not adequate at all.
Right. Like, I know you're sorry. It shouldn't have happened. And I don't want your money. You mutilated my kid. He's my kid. And like, I don't think we did a good enough job. Like again, speaking as a dad, I mean, what can you do? I mean, but just speaking from write a check, or we're sorry.
No, it doesn't begin to heal anybody. I think what you're underlining, Joe, is that once trust is lost, it takes a very long time to earn it back. And so I think there's going to be, you know, at least another decade of real wounds that need to be healed inside the church before people again get to a point where they feel completely comfortable in trusting leadership. That's just, look, that's the way things work in the world, you know, and the church is prone to that, like everywhere else. I mean, serious mistakes were made, evil things were done, not by the great majority of priests and
Oh, I
bishops.
agree with
They
that.
were but nonetheless, in an extremely damaging way, and it's going to be a while for that to be healed. So in terms of the abuse problem, that's something that I think we need to keep in mind. I do want to point something out in this conversation, though, and I hope people listening understand this. You know, we're talking about difficult things here, but the existence of this show is an example of all the incredible apostolates that are alive and thriving in this country, and we need to keep our mind on that. You know, I outline in the book, I choose 7 apostolates that are successful apostolates in the church right now that are doing really great work. You know, 7. There are hundreds. I mean, I could have spent the rest of my life just listing things that work in this church. And a program like this, which is, I mean, you guys are really terrific in terms of drawing ideas out of the people that you interview and making them comfortable. I feel very comfortable in this conversation because you're obviously guys that know what you're talking about and you have a lot of life. I mean, that's the thing that we need to focus on, not the negatives. We need to be aware of them, and we need to be willing to be candid about the problems in the church. But we can never lose sight of the fact that there are literally hundreds and thousands of apostolates and tens of thousands of Catholic people doing really zealous good work in the church. And that's going to be the key to the renewal of the church down the road. And it can only be triggered by negative pressure on us, because otherwise we'd just be tepid and it'd be go along and, you know, get along. It's pressure on the church that produces her saints, and the saints produce the renewal and reform of the church.
Francis X Maier, we have to. That's a great place to leave it. All right, we're up on the end of the show. What a fantastic conversation! Please, everybody out there joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe, go out and buy Francis's book. It's available at Ignatius Press. True Confessions: Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. So now you can buy it from the publisher, which we would encourage. You could also buy it from Amazon. If you do, though, please leave a rating. This way, it gets higher up the list, and more people read Francis's book. And also, you could ask your local Catholic bookstore to stock a few copies on the shelf. Francis X Maier, you, needless to say, you are welcome back on the front line with Joe and Joe anytime. This has
You
been a
guys are
fantastic
terrific.
conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. You're really great.
Absolutely, you're welcome. And thank you out there for joining us on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Thank you once again, and remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.